stranded in the alien jungle. The dense foreign jungles stretched endlessly before Captain Mason Hayes, a former Earth military operative and the sole survivor of his exploratory team. Thick vines and towering alien flora created an oppressive canopy above, filtering faint green light through their translucent leaves, casting eerie shadows on the rugged terrain. This was Andara, a planet uncharted and wildly alive, both captivating and dangerous. Mason had set foot here on a peace mission, tasked with opening diplomatic channels with a mysterious Amazonian-like warrior tribe that dominated the planet. But after a sudden brutal attack by rogue warriors, he'd been left stranded, alone, and struggling to survive in a world he barely understood. Each step forward felt like a battle. Alien creatures flitted in and out of view, their strange shapes and vivid colors both beautiful and unnerving. He had only basic supplies from his damaged gear, rations, a compass, and a makeshift spear crafted from fragments of his camp. The undergrowth was thick, snagging his boots and slowing him down. Sweat drenched his brow as he fought through the dense plant life, keeping a wary eye on the shadows that seemed to move with his every step. The wilderness was unlike anything on Earth, vibrant yet hostile, with sounds that hinted at hidden threats lurking within. Mason's mind raced, replaying the attack that had splintered his team and scattered them through this dangerous forest. They had come in peace, he reminded himself, bearing messages of alliance and cooperation. But his attackers had shown no mercy, leaving him with little hope of rescue. He had two options: fall into despair or find a way out. Gritting his teeth, he chose the latter. Survival was a game he played before, yet Andara's jungle was like no battleground he had ever encountered. His instincts suddenly prickled as a subtle shift in the forest caught his attention. A whisper of movement, too quiet for most ears to detect, came from somewhere behind him. He froze, heart pounding as he strained to see through the thick foliage. Only silence greeted him, though the feeling of being watched intensified. He gripped his makeshift spear tightly, preparing for the worst. Then, emerging silently from the shadows, she appeared, an alien warrior, a native Amazonian of Andara. Her appearance was striking and disorienting, her skin a deep shade of violet that seemed to glow faintly under the filtered light. She was tall and lean, with graceful yet powerful limbs. Midnight blue hair framed her angular face, and her amber eyes glowed with a piercing intensity as they locked onto him. She exuded an air of authority and danger. Before he could react, she sprang forward, moving faster than he thought possible. Mason barely managed to raise his spear, but she deflected it with one swift, fluid motion, sending him stumbling backward. Her strength surprised him, the impact forcing him against a tree trunk, its rough bark pressing painfully into his back. She pressed her arm across his throat, pinning him firmly, her face mere inches from his. Her gaze was cold and assessing. "Human," she hissed in a melodic but deadly voice, her words cutting through the tense silence. "Why do you trespass in our lands? Speak quickly, or I will end this now." Mason's mind raced as he processed her words. The legends of Andara's Amazons hadn't done them justice. He could see the fierce determination in her eyes, but something else lingered there, curiosity, perhaps, or even a flicker of honor. He had to convince her that he was no threat, that he wasn't just another intruder in her world. Caught between survival and diplomacy, he managed a strained response. "I'm not here to fight," he rasped, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I came to Andara on a mission of peace, to seek an alliance between our worlds." Her expression remained unreadable, yet her hold on him loosened slightly. "Help me," he continued, "and I can ensure Earth's leaders recognize your people as allies, not adversaries." For a long moment, she regarded him in silence, her amber eyes studying him with a critical, almost predatory gaze. Then, with a deliberate slowness, she stepped back, releasing him. Mason stumbled forward, catching his breath as he straightened, though he kept his spear in a non-threatening position. Her stance remained guarded, her posture suggesting both readiness and restraint. "You speak of alliances," she said, her tone laced with skepticism, "but your kind arrives with weapons and fear. What honor is there in such an alliance?" He realized her distrust ran deep, likely rooted in painful history between their worlds. His mission may have been one of peace, but she seemed to have encountered too many threats from humanity to trust him easily. Understanding he needed to earn her respect first, he took a deep breath, meeting her intense gaze with equal resolve. "Then let my actions prove my intentions," he offered, hoping to convey his sincerity. "I'll follow your lead, show respect to your ways. I'm here to survive like you." A tense silence followed as she weighed his words. Finally, with a small nod, she accepted his offer, though the wariness in her eyes remained. "You will call me Azara," she said, her voice softening slightly as she introduced herself. "And know this, human, I will tolerate no weakness nor deception. Betray me, and you will not live to regret it." Mason nodded, his pulse steadying as he realized she had agreed to guide him. Though uncertain of her motives, he understood she was his best chance of navigating Andara's treacherous jungle, and while her trust might be fragile, it was a start. They moved together into the jungle, Azara leading the way with a grace that bordered on supernatural. Mason did his best to keep up, following her movements closely, his senses on high alert. The hours that followed tested his endurance, pushing him to his limits. Azara guided him through trails hidden beneath thick underbrush, trails that seemed known only to her people. Occasionally, she would pause, listening intently to sounds he couldn't hear, her every movement precise and purposeful. Mason marveled at her skill, feeling humbled by her intimate connection with the land. He remained silent, sensing that this was a place for reverence, not idle chatter. As dusk approached, they came upon a clearing bathed in the soft, fading light of Andara's twin moons. Strange, bioluminescent plants cast an ethereal glow, their leaves flickering with vibrant hues of blue and green. Mason felt a strange sense of awe as he took in the alien beauty surrounding them. Azara remained vigilant, her gaze scanning the area as if sensing danger in every shadow. They set up a simple camp, Azara gesturing for him to gather dry branches for a small fire. He worked quickly, feeling her sharp gaze on him as he assembled the makeshift fire. When he succeeded, she allowed a faint nod of approval. They settled beside the crackling flames, silence stretching between them. Mason took the chance to study her, noticing the small scars etched into her skin, a testament to battles fought and survived. She was a warrior, a guardian of this land, and now his unlikely ally. As the night deepened, Mason felt the weight of his exhaustion settling over him. The jungle's sounds shifted to a nocturnal symphony, strange calls echoing through the trees, lulling him into a state of weary relaxation. He glanced at Azara, wondering what she thought of him, this human who had stumbled into her world, needing her help just to survive. Breaking the silence, he asked, "Why did you agree to help me, Azara?" His voice was soft, almost hesitant, not wanting to intrude on the quiet. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You intrigue me, Mason," she replied simply, as if that was answer enough. "But make no mistake, if you prove to be more trouble than you're worth, I will not hesitate to leave you behind." Mason managed a faint smile, understanding her intent. She was a protector of her land, bound by her own honor and survival instincts. He had yet to earn her full trust, and perhaps he never would. But he knew that whatever lay ahead, he was in the presence of someone extraordinary. The fire's light danced across her violet skin, casting her in an otherworldly glow, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment marked the beginning of a journey neither of them could fully predict. As sleep claimed him that night, his dreams were filled with fragmented visions of Earth, his lost crew, and Azara's fierce, unyielding gaze. And when morning broke over the alien landscape, he awoke with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face the trials ahead with this formidable Amazon by his side. The path before them was unknown, but he sensed that together they might just survive Andara's unforgiving wilderness. Into the depths of Andara's jungle, the morning sun filtered through the thick canopy above, casting streaks of pale green light across the jungle floor. Mason rose, feeling the weight of exhaustion settling into his bones from their trek the day before. Beside him, Azara moved with her characteristic silence, preparing to continue their journey. Her amber eyes scanned the surroundings, sharp and cautious. The remnants of the previous night's fire still smoldered faintly, a reminder of their vulnerable state in this alien wilderness. Every shadow, every whisper of movement in the trees, felt like a potential threat, and Mason knew better than to let his guard down. Azara set a brisk pace, her footsteps light and soundless as she led them deeper into the dense jungle. Mason followed, his senses heightened, his eyes darting around in an attempt to read the unfamiliar signs of Andara's wilds. The landscape around them shifted subtly but constantly, each area seeming to hold its own character, its own secrets. Some plants hung low with vibrant, pulsing lights in shades of blue and purple, while others emitted faint, sporadic sounds, as if trying to communicate with one another. To Mason, it was mesmerizing and disorienting all at once. They moved through an area blanketed in thick vines and foliage so dense it felt like a maze. Suddenly, Azara held up her hand, signaling for Mason to stop. She knelt by a strange plant with sharp, spiraling leaves, her fingers delicately grazing its surface. Mason watched, curious, as she studied the plant before glancing back at him. "Watch your step here, human," she warned, her tone firm. "This is a snare vine. If disturbed, its tendrils can entangle and kill." Mason nodded, carefully stepping around the plant. Every day with her was a new lesson in survival, a humbling reminder that he was in her world, bound by rules he'd barely understood. He noticed that her mood was more guarded this morning, as if she were wrestling with some unspoken concern. The jungle seemed to share her tension, the air thick with anticipation. As they ventured onward, Azara's pace quickened. Mason felt his own body protesting the effort, his muscles aching from the constant struggle to keep up. He wasn't about to complain, though. Not with her moving so swiftly and silently, her every action radiating strength and purpose. But the silence between them grew, an unspoken tension building as they trekked deeper into the jungle's heart. The morning wore on, the light filtering through the trees gradually dimming as heavy clouds rolled in. A faint mist settled over the jungle, clinging to the foliage and making the air damp and cool. Mason felt a shiver run down his spine, but it wasn't just the temperature, it was the eerie silence, the sense that something was watching them from the shadows. They reached a narrow, rocky path, and Azara stopped abruptly, her posture tense. She turned to Mason, her voice low but urgent. "We're being followed," she said, her gaze shifting to the trees behind them. "Rogues." The word sent a chill through Mason. He knew little about Andara's politics, but he had seen enough to understand that the rogue factions posed a serious threat. They were warriors who had turned against the Amazon Queen, driven by their own ruthless code. He followed her gaze, straining to see what she saw, but all he could make out were the faintest hints of movement, shadows slipping through the dense underbrush. Azara's eyes narrowed, her hand moving to the hilt of a dagger at her side. "They're skilled at hiding their presence, but we need to keep moving." Without another word, she motioned for him to follow her off the path, weaving through a series of hidden trails he hadn't noticed before. They moved in silence, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth. Mason kept his senses on high alert, his muscles tense as he scanned their surroundings, aware that the danger was closer than ever. Hours passed as they continued their stealthy journey. The jungle grew darker, thicker, until it felt like they were wading through a green ocean. The thick mist seemed to swallow all sound, creating a disorienting quiet that only heightened Mason's nerves. He glanced at Azara, marveling at her calm demeanor, her absolute focus. He knew she was aware of the danger, but she seemed to move with an unwavering determination. Finally, they reached a small stream, its clear water winding through the rocks with a gentle murmur that broke the oppressive silence. Azara motioned for Mason to crouch down beside her as she scanned the area, her gaze sweeping over the terrain with a practiced eye. Mason followed suit, crouching low as he caught his breath. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is a place of respite, but we cannot stay long. The rogues are relentless. They'll track us to the ends of this jungle if necessary." Mason nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He studied her expression, sensing a flicker of something deeper, perhaps fear, or perhaps a heavy burden that went beyond their current predicament. He wanted to ask her about it, to understand the story behind her fierce resolve, but he held back, knowing it wasn't the time. Instead, he took a moment to drink from the stream, savoring the cool water as it eased the dryness in his throat. He glanced at Azara, watching as she dipped her fingers into the water, her expression momentarily softening. There was something about this place that seemed to calm her, if only briefly. But the peace was short-lived. Suddenly, a sharp sound echoed through the trees, a snapping branch, unmistakably close. Azara's eyes darted to the shadows, her posture stiffening as she reached for her dagger. Mason felt his heart pound as he scanned the trees, his own weapon ready. Then, out of the darkness, the rogues emerged. They were tall, imposing figures with armor made from the tough hide of some Andarun creature, their faces obscured by dark hoods. They moved with a lethal grace, weapons drawn as they closed in on the clearing. Mason felt a surge of adrenaline, his instincts kicking in as he took a defensive stance beside Azara. Azara's voice was low, but filled with cold fury. "They will not take us without a fight." She glanced at him, her eyes blazing with a fire he hadn't seen before. "Are you ready, human?" Mason tightened his grip on his spear, his muscles coiling with determination. Ready. The first rogue lunged at them, his weapon flashing in the dim light. Azara moved like lightning, sidestepping the attack and delivering a swift, precise blow that sent her opponent stumbling back. Mason followed her lead, thrusting his spear at another rogue who had charged forward, narrowly dodging the swipe of a serrated blade. The battle was fierce and unrelenting. The rogues were skilled, their movements calculated, each attack testing Azara and Mason's endurance. But Mason found himself rising to the challenge, his training as a soldier guiding his every move. He fought with a raw intensity, aware that his life depended on every decision he made. Azara was a whirlwind of controlled fury, her movements fluid and deadly. She fought with a focus that bordered on the supernatural, her dagger glinting as it sliced through the air. Mason caught glimpses of her in the midst of the chaos, her violet skin glowing faintly, her expression fierce and unyielding. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the rogues retreated, disappearing back into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. Mason staggered back, catching his breath, his body aching from the strain of the fight. He looked at Azara, who was breathing heavily, but her gaze remained steady, her expression unreadable. They were victorious, but the encounter had left its mark on them both. The weight of survival pressed heavily on Mason, a reminder that they were far from safe in this hostile land. He looked at Azara, realizing that their bond, however tenuous, had deepened in the crucible of battle. They were more than allies now. They were survivors, bound by the unspoken understanding that they had each other's lives in their hands. As they resumed their journey, Azara spoke quietly, her voice carrying a rare hint of warmth. "You fought well, Mason. Perhaps there is more to you than I first thought." Mason met her gaze, feeling a surge of respect and gratitude. "Thanks to your guidance, I wouldn't have made it this far without you." A faint smile tugged at the corner of her lips, a glimpse of the woman behind the warrior. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by her usual steely resolve. They continued forward, the jungle closing in around them once more, the silence settling like a shroud. Yet despite the danger and the unknown path ahead, Mason felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was not just surviving, he was fighting, learning, becoming part of this alien world. And beside him, Azara was more than just a guide. She was a force of nature, a warrior with secrets and strength beyond his understanding. As night fell, casting the jungle into shadows, Mason knew one thing with certainty. Whatever awaited them, they would face it together, bound by a trust forged in the fires of survival. Secrets of the Amazon Shrine. The third day on Andara dawned with an unusual quiet, broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves as a breeze swept through the dense canopy. Mason rose from a shallow sleep, his muscles aching and his mind still processing the close brush with death from their encounter with the rogues. Azara was already awake, her gaze focused somewhere beyond their camp, as if listening to something only she could hear. Her stillness was unnerving yet comforting, a reminder that she was ever vigilant, and in her presence he felt a fragile semblance of security. Without a word, Azara motioned for Mason to follow her as she set a brisk pace. They had long since left the narrow trails behind, navigating deeper into uncharted parts of the jungle where towering twisted trees cast elongated shadows across the land. The terrain was unforgiving, rocks covered in moss made for treacherous footing, and every step seemed to bring a new layer of foliage that Mason had to fight his way through. Yet Azara moved as if she were gliding, her footsteps silent and purposeful. After several hours of this relentless pace, Mason's curiosity finally got the better of him. He was out of breath, his endurance tested by the unending maze of Andara's wilderness. "Azara," he called out, his voice soft but insistent, "where are we going?" She paused, glancing back at him with her usual unreadable expression. "There is a place," she replied, her tone low and cautious. "A place hidden from the rogues, from all who seek to desecrate our lands." She hesitated, as if weighing whether to share more, before adding, "It is an ancient shrine, a sanctuary where my people once went to honor our bond with the forest." The words held a reverence Mason hadn't heard before. The thought of such a place, one steeped in history and perhaps even magic, intrigued him. He nodded, accepting her explanation without further question, sensing that whatever this place was, it meant a great deal to her. Together, they continued in silence, the landscape growing more hauntingly beautiful with each passing hour. The jungle thickened, transforming into a green labyrinth where sunlight barely penetrated, casting the forest floor in an ethereal, shadowy glow. Mist hung in the air, settling on Mason's skin in fine droplets as they trekked deeper. It wasn't long before he started to see signs of what Azara had described. Stone pillars, worn by time and tangled with vines, appeared sporadically, each one etched with intricate patterns that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. The symbols were unlike anything Mason had seen before, their shapes flowing together in a language he couldn't understand. Azara's demeanor changed as they approached these ancient structures, her movements growing slower, more measured. There was a look in her eyes that Mason could only describe as longing, a glimpse into the heart of a warrior who had once been something more. He kept his silence, allowing her space as she led him toward the heart of this forgotten sanctuary. Finally, they arrived at the edge of a large, circular clearing. At its center stood a massive stone altar, half buried beneath layers of vines and moss. The structure seemed ancient, a relic from a time when her people must have been at peace, unburdened by the divisions and conflicts that plagued them now. Mason's eyes were drawn to the faint, shimmering patterns carved into the altar's surface, glowing with a light that seemed to come from within. Azara knelt beside the altar, her fingers brushing lightly over the carvings. She closed her eyes, as if communing with the memories embedded in the stone, memories that only she could feel. Mason watched in silence, struck by the reverence in her posture, the vulnerability she revealed in this moment. The silence between them felt sacred, as if any words would shatter the fragile connection she had with this place. After a long while, she spoke, her voice soft and filled with an emotion he hadn't heard from her before. "This was a place of peace," she said, her eyes still closed. "Before the wars, before the rogues turned on our queen, my people came here to offer thanks to the spirits of the forest, to seek wisdom and protection." Her gaze shifted to Mason, her eyes reflecting a deep sadness. "Now, few even remember it exists. The bond we once had with the land has been weakened by conflict and bloodshed." Mason felt a pang of empathy, sensing the weight of her words. He thought of Earth and the countless places that had been forgotten, swallowed by time and war. He understood the loss, the hollow ache of watching something sacred fade into obscurity. Tentatively, he reached out, his hand hovering over the altar as he struggled to find words. "I'm sorry, Azara. This place, it deserves to be remembered." Azara's gaze softened, and she gave a slight nod, her fingers lingering on the altar's surface. "I brought you here because it is the only place the rogues will not dare to follow. They have no reverence, no respect for what they do not understand. But there is another reason." She hesitated, as if weighing her words. "I needed to remember who I am, who we are beyond warriors and protectors. Here, I am reminded that my people once knew peace, that we are more than just our struggles." Mason felt the gravity of her confession, the glimpse she offered into her own inner conflict. She was a warrior, bound by duty and survival, but in this sacred place, she was also a woman searching for something more. He met her gaze, his voice steady as he said, "I may be an outsider, but if you let me, I want to understand, to honor this place with you." For a moment, she seemed taken aback, her expression softening as she studied him. There was a vulnerability in her amber eyes, a flicker of trust that surprised them both. With a slow nod, she accepted his offer, her guarded demeanor melting just enough to reveal the person beneath the warrior's armor. They spent the next few hours at the shrine, Mason helping Azara clear away the vines and debris that had accumulated over the years. As they worked, she shared fragments of her people's history, stories of her ancestors who had forged a bond with the forest, learning to coexist with its creatures and draw strength from its secrets. Her voice held a quiet pride, a testament to the deep roots her people shared with this land. As they finished clearing the shrine, Azara retrieved a small, woven satchel from her belt. From it, she took a handful of fine, white powder and sprinkled it across the altar, murmuring words in her native language that Mason couldn't understand. The powder caught the faint light and began to glow, illuminating the carvings on the altar with a soft, otherworldly radiance. Azara looked at him, her gaze solemn. "This is a prayer for guidance," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "A call to the spirits of the forest, asking them to protect us on our journey." Mason nodded, feeling the weight of the ritual, the sense of reverence that hung in the air. Together, they stood in silence, watching as the altar seemed to come alive, its carvings pulsating with a gentle, rhythmic light that filled the clearing. Mason felt a sense of peace settle over him, a momentary respite from the fear and tension that had gripped him since he first arrived on Andara. But as the ritual came to a close, the silence was broken by a sudden, sharp sound, a faint rustling in the nearby underbrush. Both Mason and Azara tensed, their hands instinctively moving to their weapons. The peace of the shrine was shattered, replaced by the familiar, cold grip of danger. Mason's pulse quickened as he scanned the shadows, searching for the source of the disturbance. Azara's eyes narrowed, her stance shifting as she focused on the darkness beyond the clearing. "They found us," she murmured, her voice tinged with frustration. "The rogues." Mason felt his stomach tighten. The sanctuary, this sacred place, was no longer safe. He met Azara's gaze, her determination mirrored in his own. "What do we do?" She gripped her dagger, her expression fierce and resolute. "We fight, but not here. We must lead them away, protect this place." Her voice was firm, yet there was a glimmer of sorrow in her eyes. They cannot be allowed to defile it. With a nod, Mason steeled himself for what was to come. Together, they left the shrine, slipping into the dense jungle as the rogues closed in. The peaceful silence of the shrine was replaced by the familiar sounds of pursuit, the rustle of leaves, the snap of branches underfoot. Mason's heart pounded as they moved swiftly through the underbrush, weaving between trees and ducking under low-hanging vines. The rogues were relentless, their footsteps echoing through the forest as they pursued their prey. Mason could feel the tension building, the sense that a confrontation was inevitable. He glanced at Azara, noting the fierce resolve in her gaze, the way her jaw clenched as she prepared for battle. She was a warrior once more, her vulnerability hidden behind the steely exterior he had come to respect. They came to a halt in a narrow ravine, surrounded by towering walls of stone and tangled vines. The rogues were close, their voices and footsteps drawing nearer. Azara turned to Mason, her expression hardening. "We make our stand here," she said, her voice steady. "They will not pass." Mason nodded, gripping his weapon as he took his position beside her. The rogues emerged from the shadows, their dark armor glinting in the faint light. There were more of them than Mason had expected, their faces hidden beneath menacing helmets adorned with jagged symbols. They moved with a deadly grace, weapons at the ready, their eyes trained on Azara and Mason. The leader of the group stepped forward, his voice dripping with contempt. "You cannot hide forever, Amazon. Surrender, and we may spare your companion." Azara's response was a silent, defiant glare, her stance unwavering. She raised her dagger, her voice cold and unyielding. "If you want me, come and take me." The rogues charged, their weapons flashing as they lunged at Mason and Azara. The battle was fierce, the clash of steel echoing through the ravine as they fought with everything they had. Mason moved with a new purpose, his training and instincts guiding him as he blocked attacks and struck back with precision. Beside him, Azara was a whirlwind of fury, her every movement a testament to her strength and skill. As the last rogue fell, Mason and Azara stood together, bloodied but victorious, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The ravine was silent once more, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. Mason looked at Azara, a newfound respect deepening in his gaze. "We protected it," he said, his voice filled with quiet satisfaction. Azara nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Yes, we did." And as they left the ravine, the shrine's memory lingered in their minds. A symbol of the fragile peace they had fought to preserve, a bond between them forged in blood and honor, deeper than either had anticipated. The forest's heartbeat. The path grew darker as Mason and Azara delved further into Andara's depths. Away from the sacred shrine they'd risked their lives to protect. The jungle around them felt even more intense, alive in a way Mason couldn't quite understand. The trees seemed denser here, their branches entwined like massive, gnarled fingers reaching toward each other. Unseen creatures rustled in the underbrush, their strange calls echoing through the air. The sounds were different from those Mason had grown used to, a new symphony, deeper and more haunting. He felt the forest watching, almost as if it had a consciousness, a heartbeat that pulsed through the soil and trees, binding everything within it. Azara led him through this unknown territory with the familiarity of someone who had walked these paths many times before. Her every step was careful and calculated, each movement harmonizing with the rhythm of the jungle. She glanced back at Mason, her amber eyes carrying a warning that spoke of ancient dangers. "We're approaching a place few have ever seen, even among my people," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "The heart of Andara, the source of our forest's power." The heart of Andara. Mason had heard only fragments about this legendary place, a mystical region where the energy of the forest was said to be concentrated, where its spirit pulsed stronger than anywhere else on the planet. It was rumored to be the reason behind the Amazon's connection with the land, an ancient source of strength and wisdom. For Azara to be bringing him there, Mason understood, was an honor and a risk. He nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the journey. "Why here, Azara? Why take me to the heart?" Azara's gaze lingered on him, her expression a blend of resolve and apprehension. The heart can offer more than protection. It has the power to shield us from those who seek harm, if only temporarily. But this journey is not just about survival. You asked to understand our land, our history. If you truly wish to know us, to see the life beyond our wars and struggles, the heart will show you. Her words stirred something in Mason, an unfamiliar awe mingled with trepidation. He followed her deeper into the forest, their footsteps muffled by thick layers of moss and fallen leaves. The air grew heavy, almost stifling, saturated with the scent of damp earth and wild plants. Despite the tension between them, there was a strange peace that settled over Mason as they continued, an almost magnetic pull drawing him toward this place he couldn't quite envision. Hours passed, the light fading as they journeyed on. The forest grew thicker, the trees older and larger, their roots tangling in intricate patterns across the ground. Vines as thick as his arms dangled from branches above, trailing like curtains between the trees. Mason felt a chill run down his spine as he noticed the change. It was as if they'd stepped into another realm, one untouched by time. Then, at last, they reached it, the heart of Andara. The sight left Mason breathless. At the center of a massive clearing stood an ancient tree unlike any he had ever seen. Its trunk was wide enough to dwarf buildings on Earth, its bark glowing with a faint, iridescent light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Strange flowers, radiant and otherworldly, bloomed from its branches, casting hues of violet, blue, and green across the clearing. The roots sprawled outward in all directions, winding like rivers through the earth. It was a living monument, a guardian of the forest's secrets. Azara approached the tree reverently, her steps slow and deliberate. Mason followed suit, unable to tear his gaze from the immense structure before him. Every fiber of his being felt the energy radiating from the tree. It was as if he was standing in the presence of something that transcended life itself. Azara knelt by the roots of the tree, placing her hands gently on the rough bark. She closed her eyes, and a soft, almost musical hum filled the air. Mason watched, spellbound, as the glow around the tree intensified, as if responding to her presence. After a moment, she opened her eyes and gestured for him to join her. "This tree," she said, her voice soft yet filled with awe, "is the source of Andara's life force. My people call it Ethora, the heart of our world. It is here that our strength, our bond with the land, flows from. And it is here that I offer you the chance to understand what we fight to protect." Mason knelt beside her, resting his hands against the tree's ancient bark. The moment his fingers touched it, he felt a surge of warmth, a strange energy pulsing through him, filling him with a sensation he couldn't quite describe. It was as if he were being pulled into a memory, a vision of the past, a glimpse into the lives that had come before him. His eyes drifted shut as images flickered before him like a dream. He saw Andara as it once was, untouched, teeming with life, a paradise of lush forests and sparkling rivers. He saw the Amazons, young and old, gathered around Ethora, drawing strength and guidance from its presence. He saw that ancient rituals, the way they honored the spirits of the land, how they coexisted with the creatures that roamed the jungle. But then he felt a shift. The peace shattered, replaced by images of conflict, outsiders arriving, bearing weapons and fear, the start of a bitter struggle for control of the land's sacred energy. Mason's heart ached as he saw the suffering, the loss etched into the faces of the Amazons. He understood now why they fought so fiercely, why Azara had been so wary of him, of any outsider. They were guardians, protectors of a legacy that went beyond survival. It was a duty born of love, of respect for a land that had sustained them for generations. As the vision faded, he opened his eyes, feeling the weight of their history settle on his shoulders. Azara was watching him, her expression solemn, as if waiting for his response. Words failed him, the emotions too raw, too powerful to articulate. Instead, he gave a simple nod, a silent acknowledgement of what she had shared with him. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds those of the forest around them, the faint hum of the tree's energy filling the air. Mason could feel the tension between them ease, replaced by a sense of mutual understanding. He had asked to understand, and she had shown him more than he had ever expected. After a time, Azara broke the silence, her gaze distant as she looked at Ethora. "My mother brought me here when I was young," she murmured, her voice tinged with sadness. "She taught me that the heart of Andara is not just a place. It is a promise, a reminder of who we are meant to be. That no matter the battles we fight, we must never forget our connection to the land. Mason felt a pang of empathy, sensing the pain behind her words. He wanted to reach out, to offer her some comfort, but he hesitated, unsure of how she would react. Instead, he chose his words carefully, his tone gentle. "Thank you, Azara, for trusting me with this. I know now why you fight, why you protect this land so fiercely." She met his gaze, her eyes softening, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. "You have earned that trust, Mason," she said quietly. "You have shown respect, not only for me but for my people and our history. That is not something I will forget." Their shared moment of understanding, however, was shattered by a sudden noise, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the depths of the forest. Both of them tensed, instincts kicking in as they listened. The sound grew louder, closer, like a chorus of footsteps approaching through the undergrowth. Azara's expression darkened. "They found us," she muttered, her hand moving instinctively to her weapon. Mason scanned the shadows, his muscles coiling with tension as he prepared for what was coming. "The rogues?" Azara nodded grimly, her gaze fixed on the darkness surrounding them. "They must have tracked us somehow. They want the heart, its power. If they reach Ethera, they'll use it for destruction, for war." Mason felt a surge of anger, a fierce resolve settling within him. He had seen what the heart of Andara meant to Azara and her people, understood the depth of their bond with the land. He couldn't allow the rogues to defile it, to strip it of its beauty and sacredness. "Then we fight," he said, his voice firm, meeting her gaze with unwavering determination. "We protect the heart." A silent understanding passed between them as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The forest around them seemed to respond, the trees and plants whispering as if sensing the danger. Azara took a position near the base of Ethera, her stance steady and resolute. Mason stood beside her, his weapon ready, every fiber of his being focused on defending this place. Azara nodded, her expression grave. Not openly. They operate in shadows, spreading doubt, stirring unrest. Some have even tried to forge alliances with the rogues. They believe that by controlling the heart, they can protect our world from outsiders, or perhaps even conquer beyond Andara. Her voice was laced with bitterness. They've forgotten what it means to be protectors. They only see power. Mason felt a chill creep through him, his mind racing. He had thought the roads were their only threat, but now it seemed that danger lurked far closer than he'd realized. The idea of Amazons, those sworn to protect the heart, turning against it was almost inconceivable. He looked at Azara, the weight of her words settling on him. "Then who can we trust?" Azara's gaze softened, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. "Trust is a rare thing here, Mason, but we can trust each other if we choose to." Her words held a quiet strength, a reminder of the bond they had forged through their shared battles and sacrifices. They rested briefly, their minds heavy with the knowledge of the challenges that lay ahead. When they resumed their journey, Azara moved with renewed caution, her senses heightened as she led them through winding paths that seemed to grow narrower and darker. Every rustle of leaves, every distant call from the creatures of Andara felt like a warning, an indication that they were not alone. As they approached a small glade, Mason sensed a shift in the air, a charged silence that set his nerves on edge. Azara motioned for him to stop, her hand gripping the hilt of her dagger. Her posture was tense, her eyes scanning the shadows as if searching for something unseen. Then, from the shadows, figures emerged, Amazons cloaked in dark armor, their faces obscured, weapons drawn. They moved with a calculated precision, surrounding Mason and Azara in a matter of seconds. Mason's heart raced, his muscles coiling with tension as he realized they were vastly outnumbered. Azara's voice was low, filled with controlled anger. "Lawyer, I should have known you'd follow us," she spat, her eyes narrowing at the Amazon who stepped forward. This woman, Lawyer, wore a twisted smile, her gaze cold and calculating as she regarded Azara with a mixture of disdain and amusement. "So suspicious. Azara, Lawyer replied smoothly, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that any way to greet your sisters? Azara's expression darkened, her voice seething with contempt. Sisters, you betrayed the heart. You betrayed everything we stand for. Lawyer laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the glade. Betrayed? I think you misunderstand, Azara. We are simply taking control, doing what's necessary to protect our people. You cling to outdated ideals, wasting your strength on useless rituals and traditions. The heart's power is wasted on those who don't know how to wield it. Mason felt the tension between the two women like a physical force, their words charged with years of resentment and betrayal. He tightened his grip on his weapon, his gaze shifting between Azara and Lawyer, uncertain of what would happen next. Lawyer's gaze shifted to Mason, her smile widening as she took a step closer. And you brought an outsider into our world, Azara. Have you fallen so low that you trust a human over your own people? Azara's voice was like steel. He's proven more loyal to Andara than you ever have. The heart isn't yours to claim, Lawyer. It belongs to the land, to those who respect it. Lawyer's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold fury. She raised her hand, signaling her followers, who closed in around Mason and Azara. Then you leave me no choice. I will do what you lack the courage to, Azara. The heart will belong to us, to those strong enough to seize it. Mason felt his pulse quicken as he braced himself for the inevitable clash. He glanced at Azara, meeting her determined gaze, and gave a small nod, a silent promise that he would stand by her no matter what. The battle erupted in a flurry of movement. Azara and Mason fought side by side, their every strike a testament to their unity. The traitorous Amazons moved with lethal precision, their attacks swift and coordinated. Mason could see that they were well-trained, their movements a deadly dance designed to overwhelm and incapacitate. But Azara was relentless, her anger fueling her strength as she fought with a ferocity he hadn't seen before. Her movements were fluid, precise, every strike carrying the weight of her loyalty to the heart. Mason found himself matching her pace, his own determination bolstered by her resolve. The battle was brutal, a desperate struggle that seemed to drag on for an eternity. Mason felt his energy waning, his breaths coming in ragged gasps as he fought off yet another attacker. His body ached, his muscles protesting with each swing, but he refused to yield. He knew that surrender was not an option, not with so much at stake. Finally, as the last of Lawyer's followers fell, a tense silence settled over the glade. Lawyer herself remained standing, bloodied but unbroken, her gaze filled with hatred as she looked at Azara. Her voice was low, venomous. You think you've won, Azara. This is only the beginning. Others will come, and you will fall. Azara's expression was cold, unyielding. The heart will never belong to you, Lawyer. You have forsaken your people, betrayed the land. Leave and never return. For a moment, it seemed as if Lawyer might retaliate, her posture tense, her eyes blazing with defiance. But then, with a bitter snarl, she turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind the bodies of her fallen followers and the bitter taste of betrayal. As the silence settled once more, Mason lowered his weapon, exhaustion washing over him as he glanced at Azara. She was breathing heavily, her face pale but resolute, her gaze fixed on the spot where Lawyer had disappeared. Mason felt a surge of admiration, tempered by a newfound understanding of the complexity of her world. Azara turned to him, her expression softened by a flicker of gratitude. "Thank you, Mason," she said quietly. "I would not have survived this without you." Mason managed a tired smile, his voice gentle. "We're in this together, Azara. We protect the heart and each other." She nodded, the faintest hint of a smile gracing her lips. Yes, together. As they left the glade, the weight of the battle still clinging to them, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. They had faced betrayal, uncovered hidden enemies, and defended the heart. But he knew that the shadows cast by Lawyer's threat were long, and their struggle had only begun. With every step they took, The forest seemed to pulse with a new energy, a quiet promise, a challenge whispered in the ancient language of the trees. And Mason knew, deep in his heart, that no matter the trials that awaited them, he would stand by Azara, protecting not only the heart of Andara, but the bond they had forged in its shadow.